I'm Dr. Ellen Langer. When people hear the phrase control your mind, they imagine force, discipline, or denial. But the truth is far more subtle and far more powerful. For decades, my work has shown that the mind is not a passive observer of reality. It is an active creator of it. The way you label your experiences, the way you pay attention, and the meanings you assign, these are not small details. They are the very mechanisms through which your mind shapes your health, your behavior, and your future. If you understand this, you don't need to fight your mind. You can gently, deliberately guide it. Most of us live mindlessly, not because we are incapable of awareness, but because we have been trained into automatic thinking. We repeat the same stories about who we are, what we can do, and what is possible at our age, in our circumstances, or with our background. These stories feel like facts, but they are often nothing more than habits of thought. The moment you recognize that a belief is something you learned, not something you discovered, you gain the power to reconsider it. That reconsideration is the beginning of true mental control. What people often call brainwashing already happens every day. Your environment, culture, and past experiences continuously shape your expectations. The question is not whether you are being influenced, but whether that influence is accidental or intentional. When you start choosing your interpretations consciously, you shift from being programmed by the world to participating in your own mental design. This is not about positive thinking in a shallow sense. It is about mindful thinking, actively noticing distinctions, alternatives, and new possibilities where you once saw only limits. Control of the mind begins with attention. Whatever you attend to grows in importance. When you constantly notice decline, failure, or lack, your mind organizes itself around those themes. But when you train yourself to notice change, effort, and variability, something remarkable happens. Your mind becomes more flexible. Research has shown that even small shifts in perspective, seeing yourself as active rather than passive, capable rather than fixed, can lead to measurable changes in performance, health, and well-being. This is not imagination. It is the mind influencing the body through meaning. Another powerful tool is the language you use internally. Words are not neutral. When you say, "I can't," your mind stops searching. When you say, "I haven't yet," your mind stays open. This subtle shift keeps you engaged, curious, and responsive. Curiosity, more than confidence, is what keeps the mind alive. A mind that remains curious does not age in the same way as a mind that has decided everything is already known. To guide your mind effectively, you must also allow yourself to see multiple perspectives. Certainty closes the mind. Mindfulness opens it. When you assume there is only one way to see a situation, you surrender control. But when you ask, even silently, "What else could this mean?" you reclaim it. Each alternative interpretation weakens rigid thinking and strengthens your sense of agency. You are no longer trapped inside a single story about yourself or your life. Your mind is always listening, even when you think you are not speaking to it. Every sentence you repeat internally, every label you quietly attach to yourself, becomes a form of instruction. The mind does not argue with repetition. It accepts it. This is why a thought repeated often enough begins to feel like truth. Not because it has been proven, but because it has been practiced. The most powerful influence on your thinking is not what happened to you once, but what you keep telling yourself about it again and again. Think about how easily the mind learns patterns. When a child hears the same message repeatedly, the mind doesn't question it. It absorbs it. As adults, we assume we are beyond this influence, yet we are not. We still learn through repetition. The only difference is that now the voice repeating the message is often our own. When you repeatedly say, "This is just how I am," your mind stops exploring alternatives. When you repeat, "I always fail at this," your mind begins to expect failure and quietly organizes your behavior to confirm it. Expectation is not passive. It prepares the body, filters attention, and shapes outcomes before you ever take action. Here is the part most people miss. The mind does not distinguish between a thought that is useful and a thought that is familiar. Familiarity feels like truth. If you have rehearsed limitation for years, possibility can feel unrealistic, even threatening. That discomfort is not evidence that change is wrong. It is evidence that your mind has been trained in one direction and is being asked to learn a new one. The mind resists, not because it cannot change, but because it has been repeating something else for a long time. Every time you repeat a thought, you strengthen a pathway. The mind becomes efficient at what it practices most. If you constantly rehearse doubt, hesitation becomes automatic. If you repeatedly frame challenges as threats, your mind learns to react with tension and avoidance. But if you begin to repeat language that invites engagement, language that suggests effort, learning, and possibility, the mind reorganizes itself around those expectations. This is not wishful thinking, it is how learning works. The most subtle shift can have the greatest impact. Changing "I can't do this" to "I'm not comfortable with this yet" keeps the mind searching instead of shutting down. The word "yet" is small, but it carries a powerful message. Growth is still allowed. When the mind believes growth is possible, it behaves differently. It notices more information, tolerates discomfort longer, and recovers faster from setbacks. The repetition of possibility does not guarantee success, but it dramatically increases engagement, and engagement is what makes change possible. Your mind is also influenced by emotional tone. Thoughts repeated with emotions sink deeper. When frustration, fear, or certainty accompany your self-talk, the message becomes stronger. This is why moments of stress can harden beliefs quickly. But the same principle works in your favor. When you repeat a new narrative with calm intention and awareness, you begin to loosen the grip of the old one. The goal is not to shout over negative thoughts, but to calmly introduce alternatives again and again until the mind becomes familiar with them. What makes this truly powerful is that you are not waiting for external permission. You do not need perfect circumstances or complete confidence to begin. The mind does not require proof before it changes. It requires repetition. When you consciously choose what you tell yourself, you stop being a passive receiver of old messages and become an active participant in shaping your mental environment. Over time, the thoughts you repeat become the lens through which you see yourself, your abilities, and your future. And that lens quietly determines how far you allow yourself to go. Your attention is not neutral. It is a force that shapes your experience moment by moment. What you consistently focus on does more than inform your thoughts. It trains your mind on what matters, what feels possible, and what deserves energy. Long before you make a decision or take an action, your attention has already prepared the outcome. It filters the world for evidence that supports what you expect to see, quietly reinforcing patterns you may not even realize you're repeating. Most people believe their attention is controlled by circumstances, but in reality, circumstances only invite attention. They do not command it. Two people can live through the same situation and emerge with entirely different interpretations simply because they focused on different details. One notices loss and decline, the other notices effort and change. The difference is not optimism or denial, but selective awareness. The mind becomes skilled at what it repeatedly notices, and over time it begins to notice those things automatically. Here is where attention becomes power. Whatever you focus on grows in psychological weight. When your attention rests on limitations, those limitations feel larger, heavier, and more permanent. When you consistently attend to mistakes, the mind begins to associate action with risk. But when attention shifts toward progress, learning, and small improvements, the mind builds confidence not through fantasy, but through evidence. Attention turns minor details into major truths simply by returning to them again and again. Your brain is constantly asking an unspoken question: what should I care about? Attention answers that question. If you repeatedly attend to stress, your body prepares for threat. If you attend to opportunity, your body prepares for engagement. This is not metaphorical. Attention influences physiological responses, emotional tone, and cognitive flexibility. A mind trained to notice possibility becomes quicker to adapt. A mind trained to notice danger becomes rigid and defensive. The training happens quietly, through repetition, not dramatic moments. One of the most overlooked aspects of attention is that it is finite. Every moment you spend focusing on what drains you is a moment not spent reinforcing what strengthens you. This does not mean ignoring problems. It means choosing how you frame them. When a challenge becomes the center of your attention as a threat, it shrinks your sense of capability. When the same challenge becomes the focus of attention as information, it expands your options. The situation has not changed, but your power within it has. Attention also shapes identity. You become what you notice about yourself. If your attention is constantly drawn to flaws, your self-concept narrows. If you notice effort, adaptability, and resilience, your identity becomes more flexible. This is why mindful attention can change behavior without force. You are not pushing yourself to be different. You are noticing different aspects of who you already are. That noticing makes certain behaviors easier and others less necessary. Perhaps the most important realization is that attention can be trained. You do not need to control every thought. You only need to guide where you return your focus. The mind will wander, but what matters is what you repeatedly bring it back to. Each return is a form of practice. Over time, attention becomes less reactive and more intentional. You begin to respond rather than react, to choose rather than drift. When you understand this, you stop waiting for motivation to appear. Motivation often follows attention, not the other way around. Focus first on what supports growth, and the energy to act begins to emerge naturally. Attention, when used deliberately, becomes the quiet architect of confidence, resilience, and progress, shaping your inner world long before the outer world reflects the change. Most people believe control comes from force, forcing discipline, forcing confidence, forcing change. But the mind does not respond well to force. It responds to invitation. The moment you try to overpower your thoughts, you create resistance. Curiosity, on the other hand, opens the door without conflict. It softens rigid thinking and allows the mind to move, explore, and reorganize itself naturally. This is why curiosity, not control, is the most effective way to guide the mind. The mind closes when it feels judged. When you label a thought as bad or wrong, the mind either defends it or hides it, but it rarely releases it. Curiosity changes that dynamic. When you become interested in your thoughts instead of threatened by them, the mind relaxes. A curious question like, "Why do I think this way?" carries no demand for immediate change, yet it creates space for change to occur. That space is where flexibility lives. Rigid thinking thrives on certainty. The moment you believe there is only one explanation, one outcome, or one version of yourself, the mind stops exploring. Curiosity reintroduces movement. It whispers, "What else might be true?" And suddenly the mind has options again. Options are not answers, they are freedom. When the mind has alternatives, it is no longer trapped by its first reaction. What makes curiosity so powerful is that it keeps the mind engaged rather than defensive. Force creates pressure, and pressure narrows attention. Curiosity expands attention. Under pressure, the mind seeks safety. Under curiosity, the mind seeks information. Information leads to understanding, and understanding leads to better choices. This shift happens quietly, without drama, yet it changes everything about how you respond to challenges. Consider how differently the mind behaves when it is curious. Instead of avoiding discomfort, it investigates it. Instead of assuming failure, it asks what can be learned. This does not eliminate fear, but it changes your relationship to it. Fear becomes data rather than a stop sign. When the mind treats experience as information instead of threat, it remains open and adaptive. Curiosity also protects you from the illusion of finality. Many people believe they have reached a fixed point in their abilities, their personality, or their potential. Curiosity disrupts that belief by reminding the mind that there is always more to notice. Even familiar situations contain variation. When you begin to look for those variations, the mind stays alive. Stagnation is not a result of age or circumstance. It is a result of believing there is nothing new to see. This is why curiosity keeps the mind young. A curious mind is attentive, flexible, and responsive. It does not cling tightly to old conclusions. Instead, it treats them as temporary explanations, open to revision. That openness reduces stress because the mind no longer feels the burden of being right. It can adjust without seeing adjustment as failure. The most practical way curiosity gives you control is by slowing automatic reactions. Before reacting, curiosity asks a question. That pause is powerful. In that brief moment, you are no longer being driven by habit. You are choosing. Choice is the essence of control. Not control over every thought, but control over how much authority you give each thought. When curiosity becomes a habit, the mind no longer needs to be pushed. It moves forward because it wants to understand. Growth becomes a natural outcome, not a forced one. And in that state, the mind is not only more capable of change, it is more resilient, more creative, and more at ease with uncertainty. Controlling your mind does not require force, struggle, or harsh self-discipline. It requires awareness, choice, and a willingness to question what you have always taken for granted. When you become mindful of your assumptions, your attention, and your language, you begin to shape your experience from the inside out. In that sense, the most powerful form of influence is not something done to you, it is something you do with intention. And when you learn to guide your mind in this way, you are not losing yourself. You are finally becoming an active participant in who you are and who you can become.